Kira stretched her legs out as far as they would go, fighting the urge to yawn. She glanced out the window of the bus as it pulled up in front of the Institute for Advanced Studies at Princeton University. It was supposed to be an exciting day, a break from the monotony of high school, but the thrill of a field trip was quickly dimming in the warm afternoon sun. She longed to feel the caress of sand between her toes on some beach and felt the summer could not get here soon enough. Her best friend Ainsley nudged her shoulder. "Think we'll actually learn something, or is this just another excuse for the teachers to feel smart?" Kira chuckled, brushing a strand of her light brown hair out of her face. "I'm sure they'll hit us with some mind-blowing Einstein facts. You know, how he never wore socks or how he didn't talk until he was 4. Ainsley grinned. "Oh, scandalous. Don't forget the one where his teachers said he was slow and would never amount to anything." Behind them, Brennan leaned in, his voice low and conspiratorial. "Forget Einstein. I heard there's a part of the campus that's totally off-limits. Old condemned buildings they don't let anyone near anymore. Bet there's some real fun to be had there." Kira rolled her eyes but couldn't suppress a smile. "You would be more excited about breaking into a decrepit building than seeing where the guy who invented relativity worked." "Einstein didn't invent relativity," Ethan, Kira's younger brother, piped up from the row behind them. "He theorized it." "Big difference." Brennan shrugged. "Semantics, man. The point is, we should ditch the tour and go exploring." Inessa, Kira's oldest friend, tapped her notebook nervously. "Isn't that a bad idea? You know we're on a school trip, right? Where's your sense of adventure?" Ainsley chimed in, her eyes gleaming. "Come on, it'll be fun. What's the worst that could happen? We get a slap on the wrist and a stern lecture from the teachers?" Kira felt a flutter of excitement despite herself. She shot a glance at Ethan, who gave a half-shrug, half-smirk. As much as Kira hated to admit it, the idea of exploring the forbidden parts of the Institute was far more appealing than the thought of listening to their tour guide drone on about equations. As soon as the bus doors opened, the group filed out, joining the throng of students herded by their teachers. The Institute's campus stretched out before them, an impressive mix of history and modern academia. The towering trees lining the path swayed gently in the breeze, their branches casting long shadows over the worn cobblestone walkway. Kira shifted her backpack higher on her shoulder, her gaze wandering across the sprawling lawns of the Institute. The place reeked of history, of moments long past, of minds greater than hers pondering the mysteries of the universe. It was overwhelming, almost surreal, to be walking in the footsteps of legends like Albert Einstein. She tried not to think about it too much. Inside the stuffy lecture hall, their guide, a frail-looking man with glasses too big for his face, was leading the class through the history of the Institute, pausing every few minutes to point out where some famous physicist had sat or where some groundbreaking research had been conducted. Kira glanced sideways at Brennan, who looked ready to bolt out of his seat. Ethan was pretending to listen, his attention more on his phone than the lecture. Ainsley was trying, and failing, to suppress a laugh at something Brennan had whispered in her ear. Finally, the moment came for the tour to begin. The class followed the guide out of the lecture hall and onto the sprawling campus. Ahead of Kira, Brennan was cracking jokes with Ethan and Ainsley, their laughter echoing in the stillness of the late afternoon. The group shuffling through their tour of the Institute's pristine halls, labs frozen in time, libraries filled with dusty tomes no one had touched in decades, chalkboards still etched with half-finished equations that seemed to hang in the air like whispers from another era. Kira couldn't help but feel a strange sense of awe creeping into her bones. This place was sacred ground, where the very fabric of reality had been questioned and redefined. But even in the midst of this reverence, there was something else bubbling beneath the surface. An urge, subtle at first but growing stronger. The urge to step beyond the velvet ropes that cordoned off rooms from eager tourists, to see what lay hidden in the parts of the Institute that time had forgotten. "This place is a treasure trove," Brennan said, turning to Kira with a mischievous grin. "I bet half of it's off limits. You think the real Einstein stuff is buried in some secret basement or something?" Kira smirked, though her pulse quickened at the thought. "You mean like his time machine, right? We'll just stroll down a hidden corridor, pull a lever, and poof, we're in 1939 having tea with Einstein?" Brennan winked. "Exactly." Ainsley, her blonde hair catching the fading sunlight, shook her head with mock disbelief. "You two are insane. We're here to learn, not dig up some ancient conspiracy theory. Why not both?" Ethan chimed in, his laid-back tone betraying the excitement that flickered in his eyes. "It's not like anyone's watching." And with that, the seed of rebellion was planted. As they strayed further from the designated tour path, Kira's heart pounded harder with each step. There was a thrill in this, the breaking of rules, the silent dare to see what no one else had dared to explore. They slipped away from their classmates into the shadowy corners of the institute, where the sunlight seemed hesitant to follow. The deeper they ventured, the more the air around them seemed to change. The polished hallways gave way to older, forgotten wings of the building, where dust hung in the air like a warning. The walls were stained with age, the scent of old paper and stale memories lingering like a ghost of time. It was quieter here, the kind of quiet that makes you realize how loud the world normally is, how accustomed you are to noise. "Are we sure we're supposed to be here?" Ainsley whispered, though her voice was more curious than fearful. "Does it matter?" Brennan replied with a wink, his steps purposeful and light. Ahead, a heavy oak door loomed at the end of the corridor, its surface scarred with time. Unlike the polished chrome and glass they had passed earlier, this door felt ancient, like it had seen things that modern eyes couldn't comprehend. The brass plaque beside it read Einstein's office in faded lettering, barely legible through the grime. Kira's breath hitched. Einstein's office? No velvet ropes, no glass barriers? Just an old, forgotten room hidden away, as if the world had simply moved on and left it behind. "We have to check it out," Ethan whispered, his usual calm replaced by the same electric curiosity that gripped the rest of them. Brennan didn't wait for permission. He pressed his hand against the door, pushing it open with a creak that echoed down the deserted hallway. The room beyond was dim, the late afternoon light struggling to penetrate the layers of dust and neglect. It smelled of old books, chalk, and something deeper, something that felt untouched, like the room had been sealed off from time itself. Kira stepped inside, her heart racing. The room was small, cluttered, and yet, even in its disarray, it radiated an unmistakable brilliance. A worn leather chair sat at a crooked angle behind a massive wooden desk, piles of yellowed papers spilling across its surface. Old diagrams were pinned to the walls, their equations faded but still legible, like echoes of thoughts too vast to fully comprehend. It felt as though the air itself was thick with ideas, unfinished, unspoken, but alive. "This is insane," Ainsley whispered, her eyes wide as she slowly turned in a circle, taking in the scene. Brennan wandered over to the desk, his fingers brushing lightly against the papers as if afraid to disturb them. "Can you imagine the kind of stuff he came up with in here? Like right here?" Ethan nodded, his gaze distant, as though he could see the ghosts of theories swirling in the air. "This room is a piece of history. It's like standing inside his mind." But something was off. Kira could feel it, a weight, a presence, as though the room itself was watching them. Her gaze drifted to the far wall, where a bookshelf sagged under the weight of forgotten knowledge. It was old, older than anything else in the room, and something about it didn't fit. The wood was rough, almost crude, compared to the rest of the room's elegant disarray. "Guys," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's something over here." They gathered around the bookshelf, curiosity simmering beneath the surface. Brennan, always the first to dive headfirst into trouble, reached out and pulled a book from the shelf. There was a soft click, a sound that sent a shiver down Kira's spine, and then, with a slow, reluctant groan, the bookshelf shifted. It swung inward, revealing a narrow passage hidden behind the wall. "No way," Ethan breathed, his voice laced with awe. Without hesitation, they stepped into the dark passage, the air growing cooler as they descended deeper into the forgotten belly of the institute. The walls were narrow, lined with shelves filled with more papers, more diagrams, more secrets. At the end of the passage, an ancient, dust-covered safe sat embedded into the stone wall. Its heavy iron door was slightly ajar, as if someone had left it that way in a hurry, and inside, a single worn notebook rested on the shelf. Kira felt her pulse quicken as she reached out to take it, her fingers brushing against the brittle leather cover. It felt fragile, like it had been waiting decades to be discovered, hidden away from the world. "Is that?" Brennan asked, his voice hushed. Kira opened the notebook slowly, her breath catching in her throat as she scanned the pages. The handwriting was cramped, precise, and written in faded German, the ink barely legible. But the diagrams were unmistakable: wormholes, equations, the curvature of space and time. Ethan leaned over her shoulder, his eyes wide. "Is this?" Kira nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "It's Einstein's. And it's been hidden away all this time. This is not just any theory. This is something big." The reality of what they had just found hit them like a wave, a rush of excitement mixed with a deep, creeping fear. They had uncovered something that was never meant to be found. Something dangerous. Something powerful. "We have to show this to Dad," Kira said, her voice trembling with both awe and trepidation. "He'll know what to do." And with that, the gravity of their discovery settled over them like a heavy fog, their laughter and jokes replaced with the cold, hard truth. They had stumbled into something far bigger than themselves. And whatever came next, there was no turning back. The notebook felt heavier than its size suggested, as though it carried the weight of the decades it had spent hidden away in the dark, untouched by time. Kira clutched it tightly to her chest as they made their way back through the narrow passage. The air inside the institute had grown colder, sharper, like the secrets they had just unearthed had changed the very atmosphere around them. Ethan and Brennan stayed close, their usual light-hearted banter replaced by a charged silence. Even Ainsley, who was typically quick with a sarcastic remark or a laugh, seemed subdued, her gaze locked on the pages of the notebook Kira carried as though the answers to the universe itself were scrawled there. When they finally emerged from the shadowed corridor into the light of the main hall, the world outside seemed almost wrong. It was still the same, still bright with the late afternoon sun filtering through the tall windows, still buzzing with the quiet hum of a world that had continued on without them. But for Kira, everything had shifted. She couldn't shake the sense that, in finding that notebook, they had crossed a line, a threshold into something far bigger than they could comprehend. "We should have left it," Ainsley said, her voice small and uneasy. "I mean, whatever it is, it was hidden for a reason." Kira glanced down at the worn leather cover, her fingers tracing the faint grooves in the material. "I know, but we can't just pretend we didn't find it. This is something huge. It's history." Brennan snorted, though it lacked his usual bravado. "Yeah, the kind of history that gets people in trouble." Ethan, ever the calm voice of reason, shook his head. "We can't just leave it here. Whatever this is, Dad will know how to handle it. He'll know what to do." The mention of their father seemed to settle something in the air, like an unspoken agreement that they were in over their heads and needed a guide through the storm. Tony was the kind of person who thrived on unraveling mysteries and solving problems no one else could. His genius both a gift and a burden that had shaped their lives in ways most people couldn't understand. If anyone could make sense of Einstein's forgotten secrets, it was him. They made their way back home as the sun began to dip behind the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the quiet suburban streets. Kira held the notebook close, her thoughts racing, her mind already spinning through possibilities. It wasn't just the contents of the notebook that weighed on her. It was the fact that something like this had been hidden away in a forgotten room, in a place where geniuses had once gathered to debate the very nature of existence. She couldn't help but wonder what kind of knowledge had been deemed too dangerous, too extraordinary, to ever see the light of day.